Spring AI 2.0 Milestone 1 is now available, and in this video, we're going to go through the release notes here, talk about what's new, beginning with the fact that this is built on top of Spring Boot 4 and Spring Framework 7. So if you've been looking to take advantage of Spring AI with Spring Boot 4, this is your opportunity. We will go through the release notes here, talk about the things that are new, but we'll also create a new project. We'll talk about how to get Spring AI 2 up and running with Spring Boot 4. And then I'll go into a repository that I'll leave you with that has a lot of the code that we're going to go over that shows off some of the new features here. So if we take a look at the release summary here, improvements, 25 enhancements to expand capabilities and functionality. We have 7 bug fixes, 32 improvements to documentation, 3 dependency upgrades for enhanced security. The key highlights here, significant functionality enhancements with 25 improvements, that documentation, and the dependencies. So, key functional areas enhanced. So, Spring Boot 4 and Spring Framework 7 upgrade. This is the first thing that we're going to take a look at, and I'm going to go through this one with you. So, if you want to get all of the code that we're going to go through, you can jump over to github.com/danvega, hello-spring-ai-2. This is where all of the code is. Also, if you want to take a look at some of the new things in the documentation, if you are watching this when 2.0 is not released, we're still in that milestone phase. If you go over to the Spring AI reference docs and hit these 3 little ellipses here and go to preview and then hit 2, you will now be on the documentation that you need to be on. Okay, so let's start with creating a new project that uses Spring Boot 4 and Spring AI. You have a couple of options here. If you come into 4.0.1 and you try to, let's say, create a web app with something like OpenAI, that is not going to work. Requires less than 4.0 because that is, again, we're on a Spring AI 2.0 milestone. So what I would suggest, and this is what what you could do is go in and add the AI bits. But what I do is I'm going to go in here and say OpenAI. So we'll say this. This will give us those things. And then we can go ahead and use JDK 25. Let me go ahead and say dev.danvega. Spring AI 2, that looks good. And from there, I can download a project. And what we'll do is we'll go in, change the version to Spring Boot 4. And this is change the version of Spring AI to 2.0 milestone 1. And then we have all the bits. Otherwise, you got to go in and try to figure out what dependencies you need for the AI stuff. So I think this is the easiest approach. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and click generate. I'm going to download a zip. I'm going to open it up in my favorite IDE, which is IntelliJ. Again, I think I've said this enough on this channel. The best IDE is the one you're most efficient in. So whatever that is, whatever text editor, whatever command line, go ahead and open it up in that. And with that, we have everything we need. Let's go ahead and write some code. All right, so here we are in the application. Again, we're going to have to go into the Palm here, and we're going to change the version of Spring Boot. So we're going to say 4.0.1 looks good. And then we're going to change the version of Spring AI. So we'll say 2.0.0 milestone 1. Let's go ahead and save that and reload Maven here. If you're using Gradle, same thing, reload that. And we just want to run the app. Actually, we can't run the app yet because we are using OpenAI. So we need to go ahead and enter those credentials. So AI open. Did I not pull that in? Let's see. So model OpenAI, that's right. So OpenAI, API key. Yes, now we should be able to go ahead and run this application. Yeah, that looks good. Let's just confirm some things though. So I'm going to say bean, command line runner, sure, that looks good. We need this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the Spring, let's do it the easy way. So I'm going to say Spring Boot version.get version.var, and we can get the version. And then I want to use the chat model to, let's get the class here, get package, and I can go ahead and get implemented version, sure. We'll turn that into a var. AI, sure. And then we can say string out, Spring Boot version is that, and AI version is that. Let's go ahead and run this one more time. Did I miss something? Oh, whoops. All right, let's try that again. And Spring Boot version is 4.0.1. AI version is 2.0.0 milestone 1. Okay, so we're off to a good start. That is kind of the base, the most important feature here with Spring AI 2.0 is getting us onto Spring Boot 4 and Spring Framework 7. So that, if you want to start using Spring AI 2, that is probably one of the quickest ways that you can do it. Okay, so let's go back to this blog post and take a look at a couple things here. Okay, so the next thing is the Redis Chat Memory Repository. So we've added a Redis-based chat memory implementation with Spring Boot Starter for persistent conversation storage across sessions. There's also some Redis vector store enhancements. So thanks to Brian Samboden, for some wonderful enhancements here. Let's go ahead and take a look at these. Now, I've pulled down the GitHub repo. I don't want to go through and walk through all of this code together because that would probably take at least an hour. So let's take a look at what I've done here. I have this Redis package, and we have this Redis Chat Memory Controller. And before we get into that, let's take a look at some configuration. So from a Redis standpoint, I have this chat memory repository, and I'm saying here is Redis, here's our key prefix, here's our time to live. I also have Redis configuration for chat memory. I want to go ahead and turn on Docker Compose because that is going to kick off setting up Redis for me. So I've gone ahead and set up some services for Redis. So before anything else, I think that would go ahead, and if we start this up, we'll take a look at the Redis code in a second. But what we want to see is, yes, we have those containers that are starting up, and as long as everything works okay, then that should go ahead and start up. So while it's starting up, yes, start it up. Cool. So what's new in 2.0? So we have these conversations that persist across server restarts. That's really great. Multiple concurrent conversations per user. So the way that we do this in Spring AI, we get a chat client, we get a chat memory repository, and then we set up our chat memory. We have this message window. Here's our chat memory repository. And then we go ahead and say, if you're using this chat client, use this chat memory. So we only have one on the class, but that's why it's going to use Redis. So if we look at this, this is an interface. We have some implementations of this. So we have this in memory. We also have this Redis chat memory. So we can go ahead and use that. So now that we do that, we can say, okay, we're going to chat with persistent memory. So messages are stored in Redis and persist across sessions. This is different than in memory. If you were to use an in-memory repository and send a message, once the server restarts, it's not going to remember that. But this will persist across restarts. There's also a way to get a history for a conversation ID and then kind of list the conversations out. Now, there are some curl commands in the README, but I just want to kind of show this off. So let's start with this one. So conversation ID. If you're using IntelliJ, I have an HTTP client here. So let's go down to Redis and we can say, let's start a conversation. We're going to introduce ourselves. Okay. Hello, Dan. How can I assist you today? Now we're going to use the same user ID. So the same conversation ID. And we're going to say, what is my name? And your name is Dan, user123. Again, if we restarted that, it would persist across context. Now, just be careful because we're using Docker Compose here. If you restart I'd have to double check this. If you restart the app and restart the container, if that Redis store goes away, then it may not be there. But okay, now we can also say, hey, can you summarize our conversation so far? Certainly, you introduced yourself by saying your name is Dan, and I asked, and I remembered it. So then you can come back down here, and maybe here's a different user. Here's a different conversation ID. So hello, I'm Bob. I'm interested in Spring Boot. Hello, Bob. It's great to hear that. And so we can persist these conversations across instances, right? So now we can also say, hey, let's get the conversation history for 123. And because this is stored in Redis now and not in memory, like we have a way to do this, again, persistent across restarts. So that is kind of the Redis changes that happen. All right, so the majority of the changes now that we're going to take a look at have to do with some of the large language models. We have new support for Google Gen AI, we have OpenAI, and we have Anthropic. So I'm going to start with Google. So we've added a thinking level support in thinking config for Gemini models and updated the Google Gen AI SDK to 1.3. Thanks to Dan Dobrin for those contributions. If you don't know, we've supported Google for a long time now, but we also, in the beginning, we supported it through the Vertex API, which was not that hard to get up and running, but it wasn't as simple as an API key. Along came the OpenAI or the Google AI SDK, the Gen AI SDK, and now you can just provide a API key to get started. But there are a couple enhancements here, so let's take a look at those. So if we go into our Google controller here, we have a couple of endpoints that we can hit. This is just a normal chat endpoint. This will do exactly what we did in 1.1. But here is chat with safety ratings included in the response. So safety ratings metadata is now available. So we can send in a message, we can get the response, and then we can get some metadata, which is the safety ratings. It tells us about the safety of these responses. And so that's one thing. And then if you go, one of the things highlighted in the blog post was the thinking mode with the thinking budget support. So Gemini 2.5 Pro with extended thinking for complex reasoning tasks. So there's some information about that. You pass in a model and then you have a thinking budget. And so we determine what the budget is, and then we can send off a request and we can get some information. So I have an API test for this. So if we want to ask a question here, we're asking a math question, but we're also asking it to show its reasoning. We're setting the thinking mode to a dynamic budget, which is default of -1. So if we go in here, we'll go ahead and send the request off. This will take a second because, again, it's going to be a little bit slower because we're asking it to think a little bit harder. So if you've ever used something on the front end with the think mode, these responses take a little bit longer because it's going to try to think through the response instead of just sending back its initial response. So you see here it goes through here and really kind of digs in to try to figure out the answer. So that is Google Gemini. Now, again, as we're going through these, if you want to learn more about them, go into the reference documentation. We're on Spring AI 2.0. If you go into models and you go into chat models, and then you go into something like Google, again, we're in the Google Gen AI. And then you can jump down to something like thinking configuration. This is something that we just went through. Okay. So back to our documentation here. The next one up is Anthropic. And so Anthropic has a bunch of new features here, which is, hey, we're adding support for the latest Claude 4.5 Opus and Haiku models. Claude 4.5 Opus is my go-to model these days. So I've been using this a lot. So now you have support for that here. There's the support for the citations API, which allows you to reference specific parts of a provided document. We have the Claude Skills with Files API. This is integration with Anthropic's pre-built skills for document generation. We can do things like tool choice support and some improvements in prompt caching. Now, there isn't a demo of this in here, but I am going to talk about prompt caching soon in a future video. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. If we go into Anthropic, I believe I set up a config to set the longer timeout for the Anthropic Skills API demos because they are generating documents, and so they take a little bit longer. So I think that's why I set that up. Okay, so citations and skills. So we have the citations. Claude can reference specific parts of your document, useful for fact checking and source verification. So here we have this document. It's going to build a document. Whatever we send in here will be the document. So we're going to send in some text. We'll send in a title, and then we'll enable citations. So now this is kind of new. And then we'll go ahead and get the response. So let's take a look at a simple request for this one. All right, so we have this request. The document is just some plain text, but this could be any document. Here's some facts about the Eiffel Tower, their title, and then the question is, when was it built and how tall was it? So again, it's going to reference that document now when we go ahead and try to get a response. And then here, we're just sending back the citations. You can get like the full response, but based on the document, here is what it referenced in that as a citation. So the other change here is the ability to use the Skills API to generate downloadable documents. So here I've kind of switched on whatever type you want to send in. So if I want to generate an Excel file or a Word or a PDF, and then what I can do is use the Anthropic chat options. I'll set the model. And then we have this new method here called Anthropic skill as part of this builder, and we're passing in this skill. So in this case, maybe I'll run a PDF and it passes in the Anthropic skill.pdf. So let's go ahead and try and run this. I have create a report summarizing quarterly sales data, generate some fake data for a company called Dan's Coffee House. So let's go ahead and run that. Now this is going to take a minute. So I'll go ahead and pause this and come back to it when it's done. All right, this is just timing out on me. I'm going to show you one that I ran before. I promise this works. So let me show you the one that I generated as I was getting ready for this particular video. And so here's my PDF of Dan's Coffee House, and you can see some quarterly performance overviews. Again, I just asked it to generate some fake data, but it was able to do so. So I'm not sure why this is timing out still. This is just a timeout issue with the REST client probably talking to Anthropic, but I can assure you this works. And then once that happens, it'll produce a file ID, and then it's basically a GET request to this in the file ID, and you can download the document. So that was pretty interesting. Again, back to the documentation. If you want to find out more about this, head over to Anthropic in the chat models, and then you can see we have things like thinking, tool, function calling, multimodal. And then there's citations and skills. These are the two things we really quickly just touched on because there's a lot to get through in this video. All right, and last but not least is the official OpenAI Java SDK integration, integrated native support for the official OpenAI Java SDK with a default chat model updated to GPT-5 Mini. Huge thanks to Julien Dubois from Microsoft for the SDK integration. Again, there's a lot going on here, and this is one I had questions about when it was first introduced, because I'm like, okay, well, there's already support for OpenAI in Spring AI, and now there's official support with the official SDK. Which one do I use, right? So if you go in here, you can see there is OpenAI and then OpenAI SDK. So OpenAI is the one that we're used to using. If you go down, you can kind of read through the documentation and use that. But this is the new one. This is the OpenAI SDK. This version is still in development, so hold up until we get to 2.0. But there's some information about using OpenAI, using Microsoft Foundry. You can use some of the GitHub models with this. So that's a really nice feature here with the OpenAI SDK. And then you can go through and learn all about this. But what I want to do is jump down to the end because there's a nice thing here. So what are the key differences from Spring AI's OpenAI and this official OpenAI SDK? So you can see it uses different HTTP clients, the API updates. So one of the pros here is like, hey, if something happens in the API, you can get access to it right away without waiting for Spring AI to update it. You have Azure support, GitHub models, audio is fully supported in the existing OpenAI. Retry logic, again, this is using like something like Spring Retry, and then we have some dependencies. So here's a really good kind of decision tree on when to use the OpenAI SDK versus the Spring AI OpenAI. If you're starting a new project, if you have Microsoft Foundry or GitHub models, the things that we talked about up there, right? There's no wrong answer, but there are some pros and cons to each. So take a look at this, but I will show you how this works here in our project. So if we go to OpenAI and I have my OpenAI SDK controller here, we have this normal chat, but I have this responses API. So if you were to go off to the OpenAI documentation and take a look at the different APIs that are available, there's a chat completions API, and then there's a responses API. And the responses API has a couple additional things in it. I believe Spring AI underneath the hood uses the chat completions API. So here's an example of where like, hey, I need something that's in the responses API. I want to go ahead and use the official OpenAI SDK and take advantage of that. So we can set up a web search using GPT 5.1. We go through and then we kind of map all these things out. So now what I can do is I can go ahead and I have an API test for this. I can go into OpenAI and we're going to do a search now. This is using the responses API. So I can say, what are the latest developments in Spring AI? And here we are. So now we get these results back. So here's the answer and here's some citations for it. This is really great. Now I don't have to use some third-party service or some MCP server that has some keys or paid version. I'm using the API to go ahead and search the web to get some additional context for this particular problem. So that's one thing in OpenAI. And then I believe there are a couple others. I think I said, yeah, native Azure, OpenAI, and GitHub model support. So if you want to use one of those GitHub models, you can. And again, automatic API updates. If something happens in the API, you can take advantage of it right away here in Spring AI. All right, that's what I got. What's new in Spring AI 2.0 Milestone 1? Still unsure on some of the schedules on when the next milestone or release candidates will come, but as soon as I know, I will share that out with you. And again, when we get to another milestone, and we'll take a look at some of the new features. I wanted to go through this pretty quickly because there's a lot there and leave you with the code so you can kind of explore on your own. But if you want to dive deeper into one of these topics, I would be happy to do that. I'm really excited about all the things happening with Spring AI. I spent the last couple months really kind of focused on Spring Framework 7 and Spring Boot 4, and rightfully so. We had a lot of great features there. I'm kind of catching up with everything that's happening in the Spring AI world, and there's a lot of exciting things. So look out for some future videos here, some new videos on Spring AI in the near future. Well, hey, I had some fun learning about the new features in Spring AI 2.0 Milestone 1. If you did and you learned something, you know what to do, friends. Leave me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and as always, happy coding.